Throw me to the wolves, she challenged. The mafia boss replied, I am the Pax Alpha, darling. The smell of stale coffee and industrial bleach was the perfume of Grace Hartley's life. At 25, she felt closer to 50. Her world had shrunk to the 4-block walk between her bleak apartment and the run-down diner that owned her. One lukewarm coffee pot at a time. Valemont City was a place that chewed up people who had nowhere else to go, and Grace was one of them. She lived paycheck to paycheck, and even then, the checks never seemed to cover the rising tide of her dread. Her feet throbbed, a dull ache that had become a permanent part of her, radiating up from the worn-out soles of her black sneakers. She'd been on them for 9 hours straight, smiling at truckers who didn't see her and wiping down counters that would be sticky again in 5 minutes. She collected her tips, a pathetic pile of damp singles and loose change. Not enough. It was never enough. The apartment was worse than the diner. It was a 5th-floor walk-up with a lock that rattled and a radiator that hissed, but offered no warmth. It was the last place she'd lived with her father, and it still smelled like his pipe tobacco and his failures. He had been gone for 1 year. A mysterious death. The police report called it a heart attack on a rain-slicked street. No witnesses. But Grace knew. She knew it wasn't his heart that had given out, it was his luck, and he had left his bad luck to her, like a final, cursed inheritance. The debt, the one she was supposed to pay to an organization she only knew by a whispered name. The Pharaoh Circle. Tonight, the dread was sharper. It had been sitting in her stomach all shift, a cold, heavy stone. She'd seen a dark sedan parked across from the diner twice that week, a car that didn't belong in a neighborhood of rust buckets and delivery vans. She said her goodnights to the cook, pushing through the heavy kitchen door into the back alley. The air was thick with the smell of garbage and old grease. The single yellow bulb above the door flickered, casting weak, nervous shadows. She never made it to the street. 2 men stepped out from behind the dumpster. They weren't big in the way of movie thugs, but they were dense, solid, and they moved with a predatory stillness that stopped the air in her lungs. One was wearing a cheap leather jacket, his hair slicked back. The other was broader, a shadow in a hoodie, who just watched. Grace Hartley, the man in the jacket said. It wasn't a question. His voice was like gravel. Grace froze, her hand clutching the strap of her bag. Her knuckles were white. I don't have it. The man chuckled, a dry, ugly sound. We know. You're late. Your old man was late, too. Look how that turned out for him. My father is dead, she said, her voice shaking despite her effort to keep it level. Yeah, we know that, too. He took a step closer. Grace took one back, her spine hitting the cold, damp brick of the diner wall. A dead end. He owed $50,000. Sweetheart. Plus interest. The circle doesn't like to wait. And now, you're the family. You're the collateral. Collateral. The word hung in the air, dirty and sharp. She knew what it meant. She'd heard stories about the Pharaoh Circle. They didn't just break knees. They owned people. They trafficked. They sold. They made problems disappear. I'm a waitress, she whispered, hating the weakness in her voice. I make $7 an hour plus tips. I don't have that kind of money. I will never have it. That, the man said, smiling now, a flash of yellow teeth, is not our problem, but you can work it off. The circle always finds a use for a pretty face. He reached out, his fingers rough, and grazed her cheek. Grace didn't flinch. She didn't scream. Something inside her, worn thin by months of panic and exhaustion, finally snapped. The terror was still there. A cold fire in her veins, but something else rose with it. A sudden, blinding wave of absolute fury. She was so tired of being scared. She met his gaze. Her blue eyes, usually soft and tired, turned to ice. No. The man's smile faltered, surprised by the sudden defiance. The silent man in the hoodie took a half-step forward, sensing the shift. No? The collector repeated, his voice hardening. You don't get to say no, girl. You're in a dark alley with us. You have no money, you have no one, you're trapped. So do it, Grace said, her voice low and rough. If I'm trapped, then stop talking. Stop threatening me. You want to drag me into the dark? You want to break me down and sell me off in pieces to pay a dead man's debt?" She lifted her chin, her entire body trembling with a reckless, desperate adrenaline. "Then throw me to the wolves. I'm done running from them." The man stared at her, genuinely taken aback. He'd expected tears, begging, promises to pay. He hadn't expected this. This raw, broken, fearless challenge. It was the bluff of a lifetime. Born from the certainty that she had nothing left to lose. He raised his hand, his expression turning from surprise to anger. "You stupid little—" A pair of headlights flooded the alley, so bright they bleached the color from the grimy brick. The light was followed by the sound of an engine so deep and quiet it was more of a vibration in the chest than a noise. A long, black sedan, polished to a mirror shine, had glided into the mouth of the alley, blocking their only exit. The two collectors froze, shielding their eyes, their tough guy act vanishing under the glare. The car's engine idled, a low, powerful purr. The back door opened. A man stepped out. He was tall, dressed in a black suit so perfectly tailored it seemed to have been spun from the shadows themselves. He wore no tie, the top two buttons of his crisp, white shirt undone, revealing a sliver of olive skin. He moved with an unhurried grace that was more menacing than any quick motion. His face was all angles, a sharp jaw, a straight nose. Dark hair swept back from his forehead, but it was his eyes that held the alley captive. They were dark, assessing, and utterly cold. He didn't look at Grace. His attention was fixed on the two collectors. The man in the leather jacket swallowed, his bravado completely gone. "Mr. Morello," he stammered, taking a step away from Grace. We didn't know. This ain't your territory. Everything in Valemon is my territory if I'm standing on it," the man, Morello, said. His voice was quiet, a smooth, deep baritone with a dangerous edge, like velvet wrapped around steel. "And you," he added, his gaze flicking to the man, "are pharaohs. You're loud and you're sloppy." "We was just collecting what's owed," the man said, trying to regain some footing. Dante Morello took 2 slow steps forward. The air crackled around him. "She's not yours to collect, but her father's debt is not her, and the Pharaoh Circle does not poach from my side of the river. You know the rules." He stopped, standing between Grace and her 2 assailants. He still hadn't looked at her. "So you have 2 choices. You can leave this alley, go back to your boss, and tell him the Morello family is handling this now. Or," he paused, a brief, cold silence. "You can stay, and I will handle you." There was no threat of violence in his tone. It was a simple statement of fact, as calm and final as a judge passing sentence. The collector in the jacket looked at his partner, who gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of his head. The choice was made. "No disrespect. Mr. Morello," the man said, raising his hands. "We're gone. We're gone." They scrambled past the sedan, disappearing into the night, their heavy footsteps echoing their retreat. The alley fell silent again, but the atmosphere had changed. The previous danger had been hot and volatile. This was something else entirely. Cold, controlled, and absolute. Grace was left leaning against the wall, her legs finally threatening to give way. The adrenaline was fading, leaving her shaking and nauseous. Dante Morello turned. He finally looked at her. His dark eyes raked over her, the cheap waitress uniform, the fraying apron, the way her hair was escaping its bun, her pale face, and her eyes, which were wide with shock but still held a spark of that defiant fire. He studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Throw me to the wolves," he repeated, his voice softer now, almost musing. That was a reckless thing to say. You don't challenge animals when you're cornered. You're lucky they were just men. Grace pushed herself off the wall, wrapping her arms around her waist. "And what are you? A better class of animal?" A flicker of something, surprise, maybe even amusement, passed through his eyes. "I am the one who owns the part of the forest they're afraid to enter." He gestured to the open door of his car. "Get in. You're not safe here." She hesitated. "I don't know you. You know the men who were just here. You know what they wanted. I am not them." He didn't wait for her. He simply turned and got back into the car, leaving the door open for her. It was an order, given without raising his voice. Grace looked down the dark, empty street, then at the open car door. It was the cleanest, safest-looking thing she'd seen in a year. She was trading one cage for another, she knew. But this one, at least, had not threatened to sell her. She got in. The door closed with a heavy, satisfying thunk, sealing them in. The world outside went silent. The interior was all black leather and polished wood, and it smelled faintly of cigar smoke and expensive cologne. The car pulled away from the curb, moving so smoothly she barely felt it. "Where do you live?" he asked, his voice neutral. Grace gave him the address to her bleak apartment, her voice small. They drove in silence for a few minutes. Grace stared out the window, watching her blighted neighborhood roll by. She refused to cry. She refused to cower. She had shown these men fire in the alley. She would not show this one weakness in his car. "You're Grace Hartley," he said. "You already know that. Your father was a gambler, a bad one. He borrowed from the Faro Circle. He shouldn't have. He's dead," she said flatly. "And he left you holding the bag." Dante turned his head, his gaze heavy in the dim light of the car. "You're not like him. You have composure. You stood your ground against men twice your size. You have resolve." Grace said nothing. She was bracing for the offer. He had saved her. Now he would tell her the price. "What do you want from me, she finally asked, her voice tight. "You're Morello. You're rivals with the Faro Circle. You didn't save me out of kindness. Do you want the debt because I told them? I don't have it." "I have no interest in your father's debt," Dante said, waving a hand dismissively. "The Faro Syndicate is a collection of butchers and thugs. Their business is messy. I am not interested in owning you, Miss Hartley." Grace let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. "But," he continued, and her stomach tightened again, "I am interested in that recklessness I saw in the alley, that fearlessness." "It wasn't fearlessness," she whispered. "It was desperation. There's a difference. To me, they are the same. They are a motivator." He looked at her again. "I find myself in need of someone who is not afraid, someone honest, because they are too proud to be anything else. My estate is complicated. The staff is large. They bicker, they steal, they lie. They are all afraid of me, which makes them predictable, but it also makes them weak." The car wasn't heading toward her apartment. It was climbing the hill, heading toward the wealthy, gated part of Valemont that people like her only ever saw from a distance. "What are you offering me?" Grace asked, her heart pounding. "A job," he said. "I need a house liaison, someone to manage the staff, to handle the schedules, to be my eyes and ears inside my own home. Someone who will report to me and only to me. Someone honest, and someone," he added, his voice dropping, "who is not impressed by the wolves because she has already challenged them." They pulled up to a massive set of wrought iron gates. They opened silently, revealing a long, winding drive leading up to a house that looked more like a fortress. It was a mansion, dark and imposing, but lights glowed in a few windows. "I'm a waitress," Grace said, feeling stupid. "You're a survivor," he corrected her. "I'm offering you protection. Miss Hartley, a clean slate. The Faro Circle will not touch you under my roof. They wouldn't dare. You'll have a room, a salary. In exchange, you work for me. You bring that same unshaken resolve you showed those thugs to my household. Can you do that?" Grace looked at the massive house, then pictured her own small, cold apartment, the broken lock. The collectors who knew where she lived, who knew where she worked, they would be back. Dante Morello had offered them a choice, but the Faro Circle was not known for its obedience. She was suspicious. This man was dangerous. Every instinct told her that. He was a different kind of wolf, a bigger one, the alpha, but he was also offering her a shield. I won't be one of your women," she said, the words catching in her throat. Dante Morello's expression didn't change, but a coldness entered his eyes. "I offered you a job, Miss Hartley, not an invitation to my bed. My employees are my employees, nothing more. You will be treated with respect, so long as you earn it. He was offering her a cage, but it was a gilded one, and for the first time in a year, it was one that might actually be safe. She turned from the window and looked at the most powerful and most dangerous man in Valemont City. I accept, she said. The Morello mansion was not a home. It was a fortress of marble, glass, and suffocating silence. Grace's room was larger than her entire apartment, with a ceiling so high it felt like it belonged in a cathedral, and a bed so large she felt lost in it. The sheets were silk. The first morning, she woke up thinking the fire alarm was ringing, but it was just the alarm on her new, encrypted phone, sounding with a gentle chime that seemed to echo off the hand-carved mahogany. She'd been there for 3 days, and in that time, she had spoken to exactly 4 people. There was Mrs. Petrova, the head housekeeper, a stern, older woman with a thick Eastern European accent who looked at Grace like she was a new, complicated stain on a very expensive carpet. There was the head of security, a quiet man named Sal, who had nodded at her once. There was Dante. And there was Marco. Marco was Dante's lieutenant, or so she gathered. He was handsome in a slick, brutal way, with a jaw that always seemed to be clenched and eyes that missed nothing. He didn't trust her. He didn't even try to hide it. "So, you're the new liaison," he'd said to her on the second day, cornering her in the grand hallway. He'd put just enough emphasis on the word liaison to make it sound dirty. "I'm Mr. Morello's new house manager," Grace had replied, keeping her voice steady, her back straight. She'd learned at the diner that you never let them see you shrink. Marco had smiled, a slow, insincere expression. "Right, house manager. Funny, I've known Dante for 15 years. He's never needed a house manager before, especially not one he picked up out of a garbage alley." The insult was meant to sting, to make her run to Dante, to prove she was weak. Grace held his gaze. Then maybe he was just waiting for one who wasn't afraid of the garbage. Marco's smile vanished. His eyes went cold. He took a step closer, invading her space. "You're a stray. Tesoro. A pet. Don't forget it. Pets who get too comfortable get put down." "Grace." Dante's voice cut through the tension like a razor. He was standing at the top of the grand staircase, looking down at them. His expression was impossible to read. "My office. Now." He said it to her, but his eyes were locked on Marco. Grace walked away without giving Marco another look, the sound of her sensible new flats clicking on the marble. Dante's office was a room of dark wood, leather, and the smell of old books and power. A massive, uncluttered desk sat in front of floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the sprawling, manicured grounds. "Marco is protective," Dante said, not looking at her. His back turned as he stared out the window. "He sees you as a variable. I do not like variables." "I'm not a variable. I'm an employee," she said. He turned. "Prove it." He gestured to a stack of papers on his desk. "This is the household ledger for the last 6 months. Food, wine, cleaning supplies, staff overtime. It is inflated, by my estimates, by about 20%. Grace looked at the stack. It was thick. "You think someone is stealing from you?" "I know they are. Mrs. Petrova manages the books. She's either incompetent or complicit. I need to know which. You will audit these. Every receipt, every invoice, cross-reference them with the kitchen and storage inventories. I want to know where every dollar went, and I want to know who put it in their pocket." It was a test. A test of her intelligence, her honesty, and her loyalty. He was pitting her against the existing staff, forcing her to choose a side, his. "When do you need it by?" she asked. "Yesterday," he said. "For the next 2 days. Grace worked. She was a waitress. Yes, but she was also her father's daughter, and he had taught her one useful thing before the gambling took over: how to read a ledger. He'd been an accountant once. She buried herself in the numbers, in the tiny, cramped office she'd been given, which had once been a closet for storing silver. The staff treated her like a ghost. The maids would stop talking when she entered a room. The kitchen staff would suddenly become very busy. She was Dante's spy, Dante himself. She barely saw. He would leave the house before dawn and return late, a shadow moving through the silent corridors, but she felt his presence everywhere. It was in the way the guards stood straighter when his car approached, the way Mrs. Petrova's hands trembled when she brought him his morning espresso. He was the sun this dark planet revolved around, and his gravity held them all in place. She found herself watching him. Once. She'd been bringing a question about an invoice to his office, but she'd stopped at the door, which was slightly ajar. Dante was at his desk. A man she didn't recognize was standing in front of it, pale and sweating. It was a mistake, Mr. Morello. The man was pleading. A simple accounting error, it won't happen again. Dante was signing a document, his movements calm and deliberate. It wasn't an error. Antonio, it was a theft. You took 3 shipments. You thought I wouldn't notice. That's insulting. Please, Dante. I have a family. Dante finally looked up. His eyes were flat, devoid of all emotion. You should have thought of them before you put your hands in my pocket. You will not work in this city again. You will not work anywhere again. You will give Sal the keys to your house, your car, and your accounts. They are mine now. Your family will be given a bus ticket to Ohio. You will take them there. If I ever see your face in Valamon again, I won't be this generous. You can't, Antonio stammered. I just did. Dante motioned to the door. Sal. The head of security appeared, took the man by the arm and escorted him out. It was brutal. It was absolute. He had ruined a man's life with 5 sentences. Then Dante's eyes flicked to the door. The invoice. Miss Hartley. Grace jumped, her heart in her throat. He'd known she was there. It's for the wine. The numbers don't match the delivery manifest. He nodded. All business. Fix it. His gaze softened. Just a fraction. And get yourself some coffee. You look tired. He was a monster. A calculating, brutal monster. And yet, in that moment, he had been strangely, terrifyingly gentle with her. The night she finished the audit, the tension in the house was thick. She was walking toward the kitchen when she heard raised voices. 2 of the younger guards, barely out of their teens, were face to face in the garage. One of them, a hothead named Leo, had his hand on the gun at his hip. You called me a rat. The other one, Nico, spat. Say it again. A rat. You told Sal I took the car out. You're a rat and a coward, Leo said. Marco was there, leaning against a black SUV, a cigarette hanging from his lips. He was watching, a small, cruel smile on his face, waiting to see who would draw first. This was his idea of management. This is stupid, Grace said, stepping into the harsh light of the garage. All 3 men turned, shocked to see her. Get out of here, sweetheart, Marco sneered. This is men's business. It's stupid business, Grace snapped, walking right between the 2 guards, who were so surprised they both took a step back. You, she said to Leo, are an idiot. You took the boss's car without permission. You're lucky you still have a job. You, she said to Nico, are also an idiot. You think running to Sal makes you look strong? It makes you look like a child. And you, she jabbed a finger at Marco, are the biggest idiot of all. You're letting them do this? On Morello property? You think he wants his $200,000 car covered in his own men's blood because one of them has a fragile ego? The garage was dead silent. Leo and Nico looked at their feet, properly chastised. Marco's face was purple. He threw his cigarette down, crushing it. You don't talk to me like that. You don't know who you're... I know exactly who you are. Marco, Grace said, her voice low. You're the one who enjoys the fight, not the one who knows how to win. Dante is a man who wins. And this, she gestured to the 2 guards, is losing. She turned and walked out, her whole body shaking. She was halfway to her room before she realized she might have just signed her own death warrant. An hour later, there was a knock on her door. It was Sal. Mister, Morello wants to see you. On the terrace. Her stomach did a flip. This was it. She'd overstepped. She found him on a sprawling, private terrace that jutted out from the third floor, offering a glittering, godlike view of Valemont City. The air was cool. Soft lights were woven into the trellis above, and a bottle of red wine sat on a low table between two comfortable chairs. Dante was standing at the stone railing, looking out at the city. He was in his shirt sleeves, the dark fabric molding to his wide shoulders. "Mrs. Petrova was skimming," Grace said, needing to fill the silence. "Just under $2,000 a month, for a year. She was funneling it through a fake produce company. Here's the audit." She held out the folder. He didn't turn or take it. "I know, I've already spoken to her. She will be paying it back, with interest." He paused. "By working in the kitchen. She's no longer the head housekeeper." Grace processed this. He hadn't fired her. He'd demoted her, humiliated her. "And Marco," Dante continued, "will be on guard duty at the front gate for the next 2 weeks. He's not happy about it." Grace's breath caught. "You heard. The garage has microphones." He finally turned to face her. His eyes were dark in the dim light. "You have a way with words. Grace." He gestured to the wine. "Sit, please." She sat, her knees feeling weak. He poured 2 glasses of wine, the liquid a deep, dark red. He handed one to her, his fingers brushing hers. A jolt, like static electricity, shot up her arm. He sat opposite her, close enough that she could feel the heat from his body. "You shamed them," he said, swirling the wine in his glass. "That's a powerful tool, more powerful than a gun. Sometimes." "I was a waitress," she said, looking into her glass. "You learn to deal with angry men who've had too much to drink. You de-escalate, or you shame them, or you call the bouncer. I guess Marco was the bouncer." He smiled, a real small smile that transformed his face, making him look younger and almost human. "I suppose I am." The smile faded. He looked back at the city lights. "I grew up in this house, but it was not like this. My father, he believed weakness was a sin, that emotions were a luxury we couldn't afford. He'd lock me in the cellar, no light, no food, to cure me of it, to make me hard." Grace stared at him. This was a crack in the marble, a piece of him, offered up. "It didn't cure me," he said, his voice a low whisper. "It just taught me how to hide, how to control, how to be the one holding the key." The confession hung in the air between them. He was giving her a weapon, trust. "I'm afraid," she confessed, the wine making her brave. "All the time. I'm afraid I'll wake up and be back in my apartment. I'm afraid of those men from the alley." She looked at him, her eyes shining. "But mostly, I'm terrified that this is all I'll ever be, that I'm just a waitress's daughter, someone who cleans up other people's messes and never makes anything of her own. I'm afraid that's all that's in me." Dante's expression was intense. He had stopped seeing the city and was only seeing her. He put his glass down and leaned forward. He was so close. He smelled of wine and a clean, sharp scent that was just him. "You are not your father's daughter, Grace," he said, his voice a low thrum that vibrated through her. "And you are not just a waitress. You are the only person in this house who is not afraid of me, and that," he whispered, "is more valuable than anything I own." He lifted his hand slowly, as if not to startle her. His fingers were long and warm. He brushed a stray strand of hair from her face, his touch electric. His thumb grazed her cheek, a feather-light caress that made her stop breathing. His eyes dropped to her lips. The world shrank to the few inches between them. The air was thick, charged. He leaned in. She leaned in. She could feel his breath, warm and sweet, on her skin. Her lips parted. He stopped. He was a breath away. His eyes, black with a raw desire that stole the air from her lungs, held hers. He was fighting a war with himself, and he was winning. He held her gaze for a long, agonizing second, then, slowly, he let his hand drop from her face. He sat back, breaking the spell. The sudden cold where his hand had been made her shiver. "It's late," he said, his voice rough. "You should get some sleep." Grace stood up, her legs unsteady. She didn't say goodnight, she just turned and walked away, feeling his eyes on her back every step of the way, back in her room. Her mind was a whirlwind, the wine, the confession, the look in his eyes, the almost kiss. It made her think. Her father, the debt, $50,000. He was a bad gambler, but not that bad. He was secretive in those last few months, always on the phone, always locking his door. What if it wasn't just gambling? What if the Pharaoh Circle wasn't the only organization he was mixed up with? She fell into a restless, troubled sleep. She dreamed the alley, the two men. But this time, they had the sharp teeth and yellow eyes of wolves. They were closing in, snapping and snarling. She was so cold, and then he was there. Dante. He didn't fight them. He just stood in front of her, and the wolves whined, tucking their tails, and backed away. He was the alpha. He turned to her, his face all shadows, and pulled her against his chest. His suit was rough under her cheek, and his arms were steel. "You're safe now," he whispered in her ear. She woke up with a gasp, her heart pounding. The sun was just beginning to light the sky. A few days later, the tension in the mansion was no longer just in her head. Sal was doubling the patrols. The guards were armed with more than just handguns. Grace saw them checking the perimeter with a new, grim intensity. She found Sal by the front gate. "What's wrong?" she asked. Sal, who never said more than 2 words, looked at her. Black sedan, no plates, parked at the bottom of the hill. "Watched the gate for 2 hours this morning. Same one we saw outside the diner." Grace went cold. She looked out, past the immaculate lawns and the iron fence, to the city below. They were out there, the Pharaoh Circle. They hadn't forgotten her. This wasn't over. This was just the beginning. Grace had been given 3 days to retrieve the remnants of her life from the apartment. Sal had gone with her, standing like a stone statue in her miserable living room while she packed 2 suitcases and a single, water-stained cardboard box. Those boxes had been stored in the back of her vast, new walk-in closet, a pantry for her old life that she had been too afraid to unpack. The scent of her father's cheap pipe tobacco still clung to the cardboard. Now, a week after the incident in the garage, she finally opened it. The clothes were useless, thin and worn, but at the bottom, under a framed photo of her mother, was a small, metal box. It was a simple cash box, and it was locked. Her father had kept it in his desk drawer. She remembered the rattle of the key, but the key was long gone. Her new life provided new tools. She went to the kitchen, ignored the hostile silence from Mrs. Petrova, who was now peeling potatoes, her face a mask of bitter resentment, and retrieved a heavy-duty screwdriver. Back in her room, it took her less than 5 minutes of prying to snap the cheap lock. The contents were not what she expected. There was no cash, no hidden jewelry. Just a small black notebook and a cheap, plastic-looking burner phone. It looked at least 10 years old. She picked up the notebook. It was full of her father's neat, meticulous handwriting, but it made no sense. It was columns of letters and numbers, like an accountant's ledger run through a cipher. NFK 300 Val E, BRP 90 MIAS, CIR 15 Port W. It was gibberish, but it was his gibberish, and the phone felt heavy, like a dormant snake. Her first instinct was to hide it. Her second was to throw it away. Her third, the one that won, was to take it to Dante. The trust they had almost built on the terrace felt thin, but it was the only thing she had. She found him in his office. He was on the phone, his voice a low, lethal hum. "You find him. You find out who he's talking to, and you make sure he never talks to anyone again." He hung up and looked at her. His face was hard, the face of the man who had ruined Antonio. "What is it?" he asked. She held out the box. "It was my father's. I found it in my old things." Dante's eyes narrowed on the box. He didn't touch it. He watched as she placed the notebook and the phone on his polished desk. He was silent for a full minute, just looking at the items. Then he picked up the notebook. He flipped through the pages, his expression growing colder with every turn. "What is it?" Grace whispered, her own fear choking her. Dante tapped a page. "This, CIR 15. That's a call sign, one I haven't heard in a long time." He looked at her, his eyes dark and assessing. "This is not a gambling ledger, Grace. This is inventory." "Inventory for what?" He turned the notebook so she could see it. "NFK, Northfield, BRP, Blue Point. These are names of shipping companies. Val, MIA, Port, Valemont, Miami, the Port of Valemont, and these numbers. He looked back at her, and the last piece of her denial crumbled. These are weapon manifests. Your father wasn't just in debt to the Pharaoh Circle. He was their bookkeeper. Or, he said, his voice dropping, he was a spy. The room spun. Her father, the sad, failed accountant, a man who couldn't even manage his own life, had been trafficking weapons. He stole from them, Dante said. It wasn't a question. That $50,000 debt, that wasn't a loan, that was what he skimmed. Dante's entire demeanor shifted. He was no longer the intrigued employer. He was the man in the alley, the alpha, scenting immediate danger. He picked up his desk phone. Sal, I want 2 men on Miss Hartley, at all times. She doesn't go to the kitchen. She doesn't go to the garden. She doesn't go anywhere in this house without an escort. No one gets near her. Is that clear? He hung up and looked at her. You're in more danger than I thought. If they know you have this, then let me help, she said, the words coming out stronger than she felt. Help. You're a liability. You're the target. I'm not a target, I'm the key, she insisted, her voice rising. That's his handwriting, but it's his code. He used to do this. When I was a kid, he'd make me puzzles, little ciphers to solve. He thought it was funny. I know his system. I know how his mind works. He wouldn't just write it down. He'd hide it. Let me try. Dante studied her, the fire in her eyes, the desperate, tenacious set of her jaw. She was not the weeping daughter. She was the woman from the alley. He gave a single, sharp nod. Try. You work in here, where I can see you. For the next 2 days, they worked. Grace sat at a side table in his office, the burner phone and the notebook in front of her. Dante conducted his business, a quiet, lethal storm of phone calls and meetings, while she stared at her father's legacy, trying to unravel the mind of a man she never really knew. The night of the gala, the tension was a wire stretched to its breaking point. The event was a charity fundraiser for the Valemont City Hospital, one of Dante's largest legitimate fronts. It was a command performance for the city's elite and for his organization. You're going, he had told her that morning. As your house liaison? She'd asked, looking up from the notebook. As my guest, he replied, and the weight of those 2 words settled on her. An hour before they were to leave, a box was delivered to her room. It was not from Amazon. It was a flat, black box with no label. Inside, nestled on a bed of tissue paper, was a dress of black satin. It was simple, sleeveless, with a high neck and a low back. It was the most beautiful and most expensive thing she had ever touched. When she came down the grand staircase, the house went silent. Marco, standing guard by the door, stopped his low conversation. Mrs. Petrova, walking by with a tray, froze. Grace's hair was swept up, a few loose strands framing her face. The satin clung to her, the simple cut somehow more dramatic than any sequin. She looked like she belonged, not as a servant, but as the lady of the house. Dante was waiting at the bottom, a black tuxedo tailored to his shoulders. He looked like a king in his dark palace. His eyes moved over her, a slow, possessive burn that started at her throat, traveled down the line of her body, and returned to her face. He said nothing. He just held out his arm. Grace, he finally said, his voice rough, as if the word had been dragged from him. The ballroom was a sea of glittering jewels and fake smiles. Grace felt the stares, the whispers. Who was she? The new girl. Dante Morello's mysterious new guest. They're all looking, she murmured, her hand tight on his arm. Let them, he said. He led her onto the floor as the orchestra began a slow, haunting waltz. He pulled her close. One hand settled on the bare skin of her lower back, a brand of heat that seemed to seep straight into her spine. His other hand enveloped hers. They moved as one. He was a brutally graceful dancer. You're enjoying this, he murmured, his lips brushing the shell of her ear. The contact sent a shiver through her. Watching them all wonder who I am? She whispered back, her breath catching. Watching them all realize you're with me. He spun her slowly, his hold on her firm. "You shouldn't have worn this dress." "Grace." "Why?" she challenged, looking up at him through her lashes. "Is it inappropriate?" "It's dangerous," he said, his eyes fixed on hers. "You are dangerous." She leaned back, just enough to meet his gaze fully. The defiant spark was back. "Scared of me. Mr. Morello?" His gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes. The music swelled, and he pulled her impossibly closer, her body flush against his. Terrified, he breathed, and it was the rawest, most honest truth he had ever spoken. The song ended, but they didn't move. The air crackled. She could feel the hard beat of his heart against her. Finally, she stepped back, her lungs aching. "I need some air." She turned and walked, not ran, toward the doors that led to the gardens. She knew he would follow. The cool night air was a relief. The distant sound of the orchestra and the murmur of the fountain were the only sounds. She turned to face him under the shadow of a stone archway. "Dante," she started, her voice unsteady. He didn't let her finish. He stepped into her space, crowding her against the cold stone, and framed her face with his hands. His palms were warm and slightly rough against her skin. His thumbs brushed her cheekbones. "I told you this was a bad idea," he whispered, his voice thick. "Told you." He searched her eyes, a silent, desperate question. She gave him his answer. She didn't rise on her toes. She didn't throw her arms around him. She just held his gaze, unblinking, and stopped breathing. He kissed her. It was not the polite, hesitant almost kiss from the terrace. This was a claiming. It was slow and deep, a collision of control and chaos. It tasted of expensive wine and a century of secrets. His lips were firm, yet agonizingly soft, moving over hers with a desperate, practiced ease that undid her completely. A small, broken sound escaped her throat. She gripped the lapels of his tuxedo, her knuckles white, holding on as the world dissolved around them. The kiss deepened. His tongue traced her lower lip, and she parted for him, a silent surrender. He groaned, a low, guttural sound that vibrated from his chest into hers, and his hand slid from her jaw to the back of her neck, fingers tangling in her hair, holding her steady. He was a man starving, and she was the first meal he had seen in years, and then he stopped. He tore his mouth from hers, but he didn't move away. He rested his forehead against hers, his breathing heavy and ragged. His eyes were closed. His hands were still tangled in her hair, his thumbs stroking the sensitive skin behind her ears. "We can't," he panted, his voice a rasp. "Grace, this complicates things." He stepped back. The cold night air rushed into the space he had occupied, and she shivered, feeling utterly exposed. The ride back to the estate was a symphony of silent tension. Grace sat as far from him as she could, but she could still feel the heat radiating from him, still smell his scent on her skin. They pulled into the long drive. Sal was waiting for them on the steps, his face a grim mask in the moonlight. That was wrong. Sal was never on the steps. "Sir," Sal said, his voice urgent as Dante got out. "Don't go to the garage. Marco found something." Dante was instantly alert. The man from the gala gone. The Alpha returned. "What?" "Under your sedan. The one you were supposed to take tonight." Grace followed them, her black satin dress sweeping over the gravel in the harshly lit garage. Marco was crouched by the black sedan Dante used for daily business. Underneath the chassis, just behind the driver's side front wheel, was a small, sleek, professionally placed device. "It's a bomb," Marco said, standing up. He was pale. "Magnetic. Professionally made. This wasn't a warning, boss. This was a hit." He looked at Dante. Then his cold, accusing eyes cut straight to Grace. "They knew about the gala," Marco said, his voice low and hostile. "They knew you'd be gone. They knew which car you would have taken if you weren't at the gala. Someone is talking. We have a mole, and this." He jabbed a finger toward Grace. "All this trouble. It started the day she showed up. This is because of her. Because of her father's dirty laundry." "Marco," Dante snapped, his voice a blade. "Enough!" But the accusation hung in the air, thick and toxic. Grace felt the blood drain from her face, leaving her ice cold. Guilt, confusion. He was right. This was her fault. Her father's sins. Climbing out of his grave to pull her down. I'm sorry, she stammered, wrapping her arms around herself. My father, I didn't know. This is not your fault, Dante said, his gaze fixed on the bomb. His fury was a cold, controlled thing. This is theirs. They just made it personal. He turned to Sal. Take her inside. Double the guard. Lock the house down. No one sleeps tonight. Sal guided her back to her room, his hand on her elbow. But she couldn't stay there. It was in the West Wing, isolated, far from him, far from the center of the house. She felt like a sitting duck. She grabbed her pillow and the thick down comforter from the bed. She walked down the silent, carpeted hall, past the suits of armor and the dark oil paintings, to the East Wing, to his wing. She entered the guest room directly next to Dante's suite. It shared a wall. She could hear the muffled vibration of his voice through it as he gave orders. She didn't bother with the lights. She locked the door, dropped the pillow and comforter on the bed, and sat, her heart pounding. She wouldn't run. She wouldn't be the weak link. She was digging in. Hours later, the house was quiet, but it was the quiet of a coiled snake, Dante. His tuxedo jacket and tie long gone, his sleeves rolled up, finally finished his calls. He had his house swept for bugs, his men on high alert, and a war to plan. He walked up the stairs, exhaustion pulling at him, but the fury keeping him straight. He passed a room, saw the door shut. He continued to his own, but stopped. He looked across the hall, the guest room. A sliver of light was visible underneath the door. He stood in the doorway of his own suite, looking at her door. He could picture her in there, huddled, frightened. He had brought this danger to her. No, she had brought it to him, and he, like a fool, had invited it in. He stood there for a long time, just watching the door. He imagined her asleep, the soft light from the hall falling on her face, her hand tucked under her cheek. She wasn't a stray. She wasn't an employee. She wasn't even a complication. She was a target, and the only thing in his cold, dark world that he suddenly, violently, wanted to protect, something in him, the boy he'd locked in the cellar all those years ago, shifted. The Alpha had found something to guard, and God help anyone who tried to take it from him. The bomb under Dante's car shattered the fragile peace of the mansion. The night of the gala was the end of any pretense. Grace was no longer a guest, an employee, or a curiosity. She was a target, and by extension, she was now part of the command center. Her life moved from the silver polishing closet to the dark, leather-bound fortress of Dante's office. She slept in the guest room next to his, but she lived at the side table he'd set up for her, poring over the gala guest list, cross-referencing names with security logs, trying to find the mole who had invited death to their doorstep. She learned the rhythms of his world, the silent, heavy-shouldered men who came and went, the hushed, brutal phone calls, the smell of strong coffee and the faint, lingering scent of his cologne in the air-conditioned room. She was good at it, her mind, so long occupied with stacking orders and calculating tips, relished the complexity. She saw patterns they missed. "This name," she said one afternoon, sliding a list across his desk. "Arthur Camden, he's on the hospital's board of trustees. He RSVP'd yes, but Sal's logs show he never arrived, but his +1 did, Miss Velez." She stayed for exactly 15 minutes, never left the bar, and then disappeared. Dante looked at her, a glint of genuine, cold respect in his eyes. "Find her." But the house, for all its luxury, was a cage. After 5 days of breathing recycled air in the same 4 walls, the tension began to wear on her. She was a prisoner in silk pajamas. "I have to get out," she said. Standing up so abruptly her chair scraped the hardwood, Dante looked up from a schematic of the city's sewer system. "No, not out," she argued, her voice tight with desperation. "I'm not stupid. I mean, for 1 hour. I need to buy my own shampoo. I need to see a fluorescent light. I need to stand in a line and feel normal. I'm going insane in here. Dante." He stared at her. He saw the frayed edges of her nerves, the paleness of her skin. "I'll have Sal get you shampoo." "That's not the point," she snapped. "I can't be your liaison if I'm a hostage. They'll know you're weak, that you're hiding me. I need to go to the market, the one down on 3rd Street. It's public. It's safe. 10 minutes with guards, please." He hated it. Every instinct screamed no. But he also saw the logic in her eyes. The Pharaoh Circle was watching. If she vanished, it was a signal that she was important. If she was seen, mundane. Perhaps she was just what she seemed, a house manager. He relented. It was the biggest mistake he'd ever made. He sent her with 2 of his best men, Leo and Nico, the 2 guards she had shamed in the garage and who were now, ironically, fiercely loyal to her. The grocery store was aggressively normal. The smell of waxy apples and bakery bread, the beep of the scanners. Grace felt her shoulders drop for the first time in a week. She pushed a cart, Leo at the entrance, Nico pretending to read a magazine near the produce. She was in the soap aisle, comparing 2 bottles of conditioner, when a man in a stocking cap bumped into her. Hard. "Oh, sorry," he said, his voice rough. "It's fine," Grace murmured, stepping aside. He didn't move. He grabbed her arm. His grip was steel. "Scream and I'll break it." Terror, cold and immediate, flooded her system. Before she could react, a second man was there, grabbing her other arm. They weren't alley thugs, they were professionals. They began to drag her, fast, toward the rear emergency exit. "Nico!" she screamed. Nico dropped the magazine and went for his gun, but he was too late. One of the men shoved a heavy shelf of canned goods over. It crashed down, blocking the aisle. Grace fought, she kicked, she bit. She slammed her heel into the shin of the man holding her. He just grunted, his hand like a vice. They burst through the back door into the alley, the same smells from that first night, garbage and grease. A black van was idling. "Let her go." The voice was not Dante's. It was Leo's. He stood at the mouth of the alley, his gun drawn. The man holding Grace laughed. He pulled her flush against his chest, his arm a bar across her throat, and put a pistol to her temple. "Drop it, son, or she gets it right here." Leo's hand was shaking. He was just a kid. A black Mercedes, Dante's car, skidded around the corner, blocking the alley and the van. It hadn't just arrived, it had been following them. Dante stepped out of the driver's seat. He was not wearing a jacket. He was not wearing armor. He looked at the man holding Grace, his face a mask of such cold, pure fury that the air itself seemed to freeze. "You have 3 seconds, Dante said, his voice quiet. "Let her go." "Or what?" the man sneered, pressing the gun harder into Grace's skin. "You're not armed. I don't need to be." It happened faster than Grace could process. The man holding her was distracted by the new threat. Dante took 2 steps. A predator's silent, perfect lunge. He didn't go for the man. He went for the gun. He grabbed the man's wrist, twisting it. There was a sickening snap of bone. The man screamed, the gun clattering to the pavement. Dante didn't stop. His other hand, an open palm, struck the man in the throat. The man collapsed, gagging. The second man, who had been opening the van door, turned and lunged at Dante. Dante met him, not with a strike, but with a block that turned into a throw. The man, twice Dante's size, flew into the brick wall of the alley. Dante was on him in an instant. It was not a fight, it was a dismantling. His fists moved with a brutal, percussive efficiency. There was the thud of knuckles on ribs, the sharp crack of a nose. It was terrifying. It was the most graceful, awful thing she had ever seen. In less than 10 seconds, it was over. 2 men were groaning on the ground. The van screeched away, the driver abandoning his team. Dante stood, breathing hard, his chest heaving. His knuckles were split and bleeding. He turned to Grace. She was slumped against the wall, her entire body shaking, a long, ugly scrape blooming on her cheek from where she'd been shoved. He didn't speak. He walked to her, pulled her away from the wall, and wrapped his arms around her, crushing her against his chest. He buried his face in her hair, his arms like steel bands, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. She didn't care. She clutched the fabric of his shirt, her face pressed into his shoulder, and held on. Her sobs silent and convulsive. He just held her. shielding her from the world, his body a solid, warm, and violent fortress. The ride home was silent. He drove. He had waved off Sal in the other car, needing her alone. She stared at his hands on the steering wheel, his bloody, bruised knuckles. He had killed for her, or would have. He had come for her. He brought her inside, the house dead silent, in the grand hallway, under the light of the crystal chandelier. He finally let her go, but only to look at her. His eyes scanned the scrape on her cheek, the bruise forming on her arm where she'd been grabbed. "Go to my room," he ordered. His voice raw. She obeyed. His suite was dark, masculine, all grays and blacks. The bathroom was the size of her old apartment, all marble and glass. She sat on the edge of the massive tub while he retrieved the first aid kit. He knelt in front of her. He said nothing. He poured antiseptic on a cotton pad. His touch, when it came, was shockingly gentle. His bloody, rough fingers, the ones that had just broken a man, trembled as they dabbed at the scrape on her face. The sting of the antiseptic was nothing compared to the sting of his touch. It broke her. A single tear slid down her other cheek, then another, then a sob, thick and ugly, tore itself from her throat. She'd been strong in the alley. She had been strong in the office. She couldn't be strong here. I was so scared. She wept, the words fracturing. He had a gun. I thought... Dante's hand stilled. He dropped the cotton pad and cupped her jaw, his thumb brushing away a tear. He looked wrecked. His control, his perfect cold armor, was gone. There was only the raw, aching vulnerability of the boy from the cellar. He leaned in and pressed his lips to her forehead, a kiss of pure comfort. His stubble rasped against her skin. "You are safe," he whispered against her hair. He pulled back slightly, his eyes searching hers. He kissed the scrape on her cheek, his lips soft. Then his gaze dropped. He traced the line of her jaw with his thumb, and he leaned in again, kissing the corner of her mouth. She wasn't breathing. He was asking. She was answering. She turned her head just slightly, and his lips found hers. It was not like the garden. That had been a question. This was the answer. It was slow, agonizing, and desperate. It was the taste of fear and relief, of violence and safety. He kissed her like a man drowning, and she was the only air. She kissed him back, her hands coming up to grip his shoulders. He pulled her closer, his arms wrapping around her waist, lifting her from the tub's edge to stand against him. He broke the kiss, resting his forehead against hers. "Grace," he rasped, his voice thick with a need that went far beyond the physical. "Are you sure?" She looked into his dark, tormented eyes. He was offering her a way out, an escape from this. She was not a victim. She was not his employee. In this moment, she was his equal. "Yes," she whispered. He kissed her again, and this time, there was no restraint. He lifted her into his arms as if she weighed nothing and carried her from the bright, sterile light of the bathroom into the dark intimacy of his bedroom. He laid her on the bed, the black silk comforter cool against her skin. He didn't tear at her clothes. He looked at her, his eyes memorizing her, his hands shaking, went to the buttons of his shirt. She sat up and stopped him. Her own trembling fingers went to his. "Let me," she whispered. She undid the buttons, one by one, her knuckles brushing the hard, warm skin of his chest. His heart was pounding against his ribs, a frantic rhythm that matched her own. He shed the shirt, his hands going to her simple sweater. He was slow, reverent. This was not a violent claiming. It was an unwrapping, a careful, mutual vulnerability that was more terrifying than any gun. When they were finally skin to skin, it was a relief, a homecoming. His hands, calloused and rough, explored the soft lines of her body, and hers, small and shaking, learned the hard planes of his. He was all muscle and scars, a map of the violent life he had lived. She touched them, her fingers tracing a long, thin line on his side. He flinched, but not in pain. "You are beautiful," she whispered, and she meant it. He kissed her, a deep, bruising kiss that stole her breath. He moved over her, the weight of him both a comfort and a promise. "You are mine, Grace." He breathed against her skin. "Mine." afterward, long afterward, she lay tucked against his side, his arm a heavy, possessive weight over her. The adrenaline had faded, and the terrifying reality of what she had done, of who he was, came rushing back. "I'm scared," she confessed to the darkness, her voice small. "Not of them. I'm scared of this, of what I've become. I'm in your bed. I helped you find a mole. I'm complicit. I'm part of this." He was silent for a long moment. He pulled her closer, his hand stroking her hair. "You were part of this the moment your father wrote that first ledger. You were part of it when I found you in that alley. Don't be scared of what you are." He kissed the top of her head. "You're mine now. That means no one touches you. Not Pharaoh, not anyone, I promise you that." The next morning, the fragile piece of their night together was shattered. Marco was waiting in the office. "The mole is gone," Marco said, his face grim. "Arthur Camden's +1 was a plant. She got the guest list from an accountant in our shipping division, a man named Petrov." "Get him," Dante said, his voice cold. He was dressed, his armor back in place. "Can't," Marco said. "He was found in his apartment an hour ago. Suicide, 2 in the back of the head, dead end." The air in the room went frigid. The Pharaoh Circle was cleaning house. "No," Grace said, standing up from her side table. Both men looked at her. "It's not a dead end." She walked to the safe, where Dante had locked her father's box. She took out the burner phone. It felt heavy in her hand. "My father was their bookkeeper, and he was spying on them. This accountant was your bookkeeper, and he was spying for them. They're using the same playbook, which means—" She held up the phone. "This is how they talk. The mole is dead, so they need a new one. They don't know we have this. We can use it. We can set a trap." Dante watched her, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his face. The woman he had held last night was gone. In her place was his partner. "Beta trap," he repeated, the words tasting good. He began giving orders. Marco relayed them. The house. The entire Morello organization began to move. It was no longer a defensive posture. It was the mobilization for war. Grace watched him, his face hard, his voice clipping out commands that would lead to blood and death. She had done this. She had unleashed the Alpha, and as she watched the man she had given herself to, a cold dread settled in her heart. She wasn't worried if he would win. She was worried about what he would become in the process and what part of himself he would have to kill to keep her safe. The burner phone was a relic, a brick of black plastic, but to Grace, it was her father's final confession. The notebook had been the key, just as she'd suspected. His mind, the one she'd inherited, was a labyrinth of cross-references and personal codes. The letter patterns were dates. The numbers were page references to an old accounting textbook she still had. It took her 36 hours, fueled by black coffee and a cold, simmering dread. But she finally unlocked it. The phone whirred to life, its tiny, pixelated screen glowing a sickly green. One new file, a saved voicemail. No, not a voicemail, a recording. She pressed play. Dante was at his desk, his back to her, watching the city as it prepared for night. He was a statue of coiled tension. The recording was tinny, full of static, but the voice was unmistakable. Her father's voice. "A simple adjustment. $50,000 is my price. A finder's fee." A second voice, rougher, with a nasal quality she'd never heard. "You think you can just play both sides, Hartley? You're giving us Pharaoh's shipping manifests, and you're giving him ours? I'm giving you a chance." Her father's voice, slick, confident, terrifyingly unfamiliar. "I'm giving you Morello's port schedule for next week. He's moving something big. The $50,000 is for that. The rest, well, the rest is my insurance. You get his schedule. He gets your discrepancies. I'm just a simple accountant, caught in the middle. I just want to be paid for the risk." A cold laugh from the second man. "You're a dead man, Hartley. You just don't know it yet." The recording ended. The silence in the office was absolute, heavier than any sound. Tucked inside the same file was a single set of GPS coordinates. Grace whispered, her hand still on the phone. He wasn't a victim. He wasn't just a gambler. Dante turned, very slowly. His face was devoid of all color, all emotion. It was a perfect blank mask of cold marble. His stillness was the most terrifying thing she had ever seen. "That second voice," he said, his own voice a low, empty rumble. "Enzo Ferro. He's been dead for 6 months. My men killed him." He walked to her, his steps silent on the thick rug. He didn't look at her. He looked at the phone. "Morello's port schedule, next week. That was the week I lost 3 men at the port. The week my cousin, Angelo, was ambushed. He was 22. The pieces clicked into place. A horrible, bloody mosaic. Her father, her sad, pathetic father, had tried to play 2 mafia bosses against each other. He had gotten sloppy. He had gotten people killed, and he had gotten himself killed. The $50,000 wasn't a debt he owed. It was the price of his own betrayal. The one he never got to collect, the weight of it, the sheer, crushing magnitude of his sin, landed on her. The men in the alley, the bomb, the kidnapping, the dead accountant, the dead men at the port, it all led back to this small metal box. It all led back to her. His blood was her blood. "Oh, God," she gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Dante, I didn't know. The deaths. Angelo. It's my fault." She started to shake, a violent, uncontrollable tremor. "My family. We did this. I brought this to you." She backed away, stumbling, the room spinning. She was a curse, a plague. She was just like him. She broke down, a raw, racking sob tearing from her chest, the kind of cry that came from the very bottom of her soul. She sank to her knees, the phone clattering to the floor. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." Dante was in front of her, in one swift, powerful motion. He was on his own knee, his hands closing over her shoulders. He didn't say anything. He just pulled her. He hauled her against his chest, his arms wrapping around her, one hand tangling in her hair, the other pressing her face hard against his suit. He was an anchor, the only solid thing in her collapsing world. She clutched his jacket, her sobs muffled against the fine wool, her tears soaking his shirt. He let her cry, holding her with a crushing, grounding force. He held her until the sobs quieted into ragged, hiccuping breaths. Only then did he speak, his lips against the top of her head. "His sins," he whispered, his voice a low, rough command. "Not yours. He was a fool, a greedy, weak fool. You are not." She tried to pull back. "But my name, my blood—" "I don't give a damn about your name," he growled, his grip tightening, forcing her to listen. "I care about you. You are not your father. Grace, you didn't make that recording. You didn't make that deal. You brought this to me. You trusted me. You are not him." He held her face between his palms, his thumbs brushing away the wetness from her cheeks. His dark eyes were burning with an intensity that had nothing to do with rage and everything to do with a raw, fierce possessiveness. He was drawing a line, separating her from her past, from her blood, and tethering her to him. That night, the house was on the verge of war. Men moved silently through the halls, carrying hard cases. Phone calls were made in low, urgent tones, but in Dante's study, he built a fire. He had brought her in, sat her on the thick bearskin rug, and put a glass of brandy in her trembling hands. He sat beside her, his back against the leather sofa, his legs stretched out. They didn't speak. They just watched the flames. The silence was a balm, the shared brandy, the warmth of the fire, the solid presence of him beside her. It was an island of peace in a sea of imminent violence. She leaned her head against his shoulder. He didn't flinch. After a moment, his arm came around her, pulling her closer. She sighed, the tension draining from her, leaving only a bone-deep exhaustion. "He read those books to me," she murmured, staring into the fire. "The accounting books. He used to make up stories about the numbers. He was a good father. Once. Before." Dante said nothing. He just held her. His hand found hers, his fingers lacing with hers. It wasn't the desperate, passionate grip from before. It was a simple, profound connection. This is me. This is you. We are here. She turned her head, looking at his profile in the firelight, the hard jaw, the straight nose, the scars she'd kissed. He was the most dangerous man she'd ever met, and she had never, in her entire life, felt this safe. She lifted her free hand and touched his cheek. He turned his head, his dark eyes locking with hers. The question was there, in the depths, not of lust, but of need. A need to be seen, to be held. He leaned in, and she met him halfway. The kiss was not like the others. It was not a claiming or a confession. It was an agreement. It was slow and deep, and tasted of brandy and smoke and a shared, quiet sorrow. It was the kiss of two survivors, huddling together for warmth. His hand moved from her shoulder to her hair, cupping the back of her head, his fingers gentle. Her hand slid from his cheek to his chest, feeling the steady, solid beat of his heart under her palm. The kiss deepened, becoming a slow, moving tide that pulled her under. He broke the kiss to press his lips to her temple, her cheekbone, the line of her jaw. His touch was reverent. He wasn't taking. He was mapping. He was learning her, and she, in turn, clung to him, her body molding to his, finding a new, stronger intimacy in the quiet. This was not about passion. It was about possession, in the truest sense. They belonged to each other, not as master and pet, but as two broken, matching pieces. The next morning, the study was a war room. The fire was dead. A large satellite map of the Valemont ports was spread across the antique desk. Sal and Marco stood beside Dante, their faces grim. "The coordinates," Dante said, pointing. "Warehouse 7, an abandoned fish processing plant. It's a perfect choke point. They're moving a shipment tonight. We know from the mole's notes it's a weapons buy. The Pharaoh Circle thinks they're meeting a new supplier. Instead, they'll meet us." "It's a trap, boss," Marco said. "Gotta be." "Of course it's a trap," Dante said, his voice flat. "It's their trap. They just don't know we're the ones holding the spring. I'm coming with you." The three men turned. Grace stood in the doorway. She was not in her silk pajamas. She was dressed in black jeans, a dark sweater, and her old, worn-out sneakers. Her hair was pulled back in a tight braid. Her face was pale but set, her eyes clear. "No," Dante said, his voice final. "You don't understand," she said, walking into the room. She ignored Sal and Marco. Her eyes were only on Dante. "This isn't about the fight. I'm not a soldier. This is about my family. My father started this. His ghost, his mess, is all over this. I have to be there when it ends. I have to see the truth for myself. I am not a child you hide in the attic. Dante, I am the reason this is happening. I will not be a liability. I will not get in the way, but I will be there." Dante stared at her. He saw the woman from the alley, the woman who had shamed his men, the woman who had deciphered a dead man's code. This was not a plea. It was a statement. She was his partner, and she was right. He looked at Sal. "Give her a vest." The warehouse smelled of salt, rust, and old fish. It was a cavernous, dark space. Grace was tucked into a high alcove with Dante, a concrete half-wall in front of them, giving them a perfect view of the warehouse floor below. The vest was heavy and stiff under her sweater. The weight was agonizing. Then, headlights, a van, 3 cars, 10 men, all heavily armed, fanned out, securing the space. The man from the recording, Enzo Ferro, was not there. This was a new crew, led by a man with a scarred face. Dante's men were in the rafters, behind the containers. "Now," Dante whispered into his microphone. The world exploded. The overhead lights snapped on, flooding the warehouse with a blinding, harsh glare. Shouts, muzzle flashes from a dozen different directions. It was chaos. It was loud, terrifying, and fast. A man, not one of Dante's, a new player, stepped out from a hidden office. He had a machine pistol. He opened fire, not at Dante's men, but at the Pharaoh crew. Betrayal. Dante shoved Grace down, his body covering hers, as a spray of bullets stitched the wall above their heads. "It's a double cross. Pharaoh's setting everyone up." The man with the machine pistol saw them. He saw her. He smiled, a flash of gold teeth. "Hartley's girl," he yelled over the din. He raised his weapon. Grace didn't even have time to scream. Dante moved, a predator's lunge. He didn't push her out of the way. He became the way. He threw himself in front of her, his own weapon firing. The sound of the machine pistol was deafening. Dante roared, a sound of pure rage. He stumbled back, shoving Grace against the concrete. He'd been hit. A dark, wet stain was spreading rapidly across his shoulder. High on his chest. "Dante!" she screamed. He snarled, ignoring the wound, raising his pistol again, trying to find a target, his face a mask of white-hot fury. Grace grabbed him. She grabbed the front of his tactical vest and his belt and pulled, using her own body as leverage, dragging him down, behind the solid concrete barrier. Bullets sparked and ricocheted off the spot where he had just been standing. "Stay down," she yelled. He hissed, the pain finally cutting through the adrenaline. He was trying to push himself up. "I'm fine. Get behind." She shoved him back, hard, her hands flat on his chest. He was bleeding. He was bleeding for her. She looked at him, really looked at him. The fury in his eyes wasn't for the men below, it was for himself. It was the raw, agonized pain of the man who carried the world on his shoulders, who had built a fortress to keep everyone out, and who had just failed to protect the one person he'd let in. He carried it all of it, alone. Her fear vanished, replaced by a fierce, sudden clarity. The gunfire was still echoing. He was still trying to get up, to put himself between her and the danger. She held him down, her eyes locked on his. "Then let me carry it with you," she whispered, her voice shaking but strong. "I'm not afraid of wolves." The chaos of the warehouse dissolved into the sterile, chemical smell of a hospital. But it was not a public hospital. The Morello family, Grace learned, did not wait in emergency rooms. They were routed through a private, secure entrance of the Valemont City Hospital, the one Dante funded, to a restricted wing on the top floor, a place of polished floors and absolute, terrifying silence. Sal had driven, his face a granite mask. Grace had sat in the back, her hands pressed so hard onto the wound in Dante's shoulder that her fingers were numb. He had been conscious, his face pale and beaded with sweat, his jaw locked against the pain. He had not made a sound. Now. She was alone in a private waiting room, a space larger than her first apartment, decorated in muted, calming grays. She was still wearing the bulletproof vest. She had his blood on her hands, dark and flaking under her fingernails. Marco had arrived, taken one look at her, and then disappeared down the hall. The fight was over. The head of the Pharaoh Circle, the man with the gold teeth who had recognized her, was dead. His betrayal and ambush having backfired completely. Dante's men, anticipating a trap, had been prepared for the double cross. The Pharaoh organization, headless and scattered, had imploded in one night of gunfire and fire. A man in scrubs, his face tired, finally entered the room. "Miss Hartley?" Grace shot to her feet. "Is he—" "He's stable," the doctor said, his voice calm. "He's very, very lucky. The round was high caliber, but his vest caught the brunt of it. It drove shrapnel into the muscle, and the impact fractured his clavicle. But it missed the artery. It missed the lung. He'll be in significant pain for a while, and that arm will be useless for at least 6 weeks. But he'll be fine." Grace's knees buckled. She grabbed the back of the chair to steady herself, the relief so profound it was sickening. "He's awake," the doctor added, a small, knowing look in his eyes. "And he's asking for you. Room 10. Dante looked small against the stark, white hospital pillows. He was pale, his skin almost translucent, and a clear IV tube was taped to his good hand. His left arm and shoulder were heavily wrapped, the white bandages a stark contrast to the dark, angry bruise that crept up his neck. His perfect dark suit was gone, replaced by a standard-issue hospital gown, and the sight of him so vulnerable, so human, made her heart ache. She walked to the bedside, her old sneakers silent on the linoleum. His eyes, heavy-lidded and dull with painkillers, found hers. A ghost of a smile, lopsided and weak, touched his lips. His voice was a low, scratchy rasp. "Tell me," he whispered, his breath catching. Did I look cool saving you? The tears she had been holding back for hours finally broke. They weren't tears of fear, but of a sudden, violent rush of love, of relief. A small, wet laugh escaped her. She sat on the edge of the bed and, careful of his injuries, took his free hand. It was warm. "Yeah," she whispered, her tears falling onto their joined hands. "You did. You looked just like the Pax Alpha." He tried to squeeze her hand, his strength gone. "Good," he murmured, his eyes drifting closed. "That's good." He was asleep in an instant. Grace sat there for an hour, just watching him breathe, her hand holding his, a silent sentinel in the quiet room. She had come here as a target, a liability. She had left the warehouse as his partner. The next week was a blur of healing. Dante, refusing to be an invalid, had returned to the estate against all medical advice. He ruled from his office, his arm in an expensive black sling, his face a mask of controlled pain, his temper shorter than ever. The war was over, but the fallout was just beginning. The black sedans that appeared at the gates a week after the warehouse were not from a rival family. They had government plates. The feds, who had been content to watch the wolves fight, were now here to pick at the scraps. Grace was in the office, reading a shipping manifest, when Sal announced the visitors. "Send them in," Dante said, his voice flat. He looked at Grace. "Stay." Two men in identical, ill-fitting gray suits entered. They were clean-shaven, polite, and carried an aura of bureaucratic menace that was almost more chilling than the Pharaoh's thugs. The lead agent, a man named Johnson, had cold blue eyes. "Mr. Morello," he said, ignoring the chair Dante didn't offer. "You've had a busy week. You've effectively disassembled a major organized crime syndicate. The Bureau appreciates your community service." "I'm a philanthropist," Dante said, his voice bored. Agent Johnson smiled, a thin, reptilian expression. He turned his gaze to Grace. "Miss Hartley, we're not here for him, not today. We're here for you." Grace froze. "Me?" "We've been building a case on your father for 2 years, Johnson said, pulling a small recorder from his pocket and placing it on Dante's desk. He was a very talkative man. "We know about the ledgers. We know about the phone, and we know you've been conscripted into Mr. Morello's organization. You're a material witness, and, as of last week, an accessory." Dante's good hand, resting on the desk, curled into a fist. "But we can help you," Johnson continued, his voice adopting a faux sympathetic tone. "We can offer you a clean slate, a new life, witness protection. We can get you out of Valemont, away from all this, away from him. All you have to do is tell us everything you know." It was the echo of her past, the diner, the alley, a new choice, a different kind of wolf, this one cloaked in a badge and a flag. Grace looked at the agent, his watery, expectant eyes. Then she looked at Dante. He was watching her, his face an unreadable mask, his jaw tight. He was not going to fight for her. He was not going to command her. He was in this final, terrible moment, giving her the one thing no one else ever had, a real choice. She thought of her old life, the smell of bleach, the throb in her feet, the cold, empty apartment, the constant, gnawing fear. She turned back to Agent Johnson. "I'm not going anywhere." The agent's smile faltered. "Miss Hartley, you don't seem to No, you don't understand," Grace said, her voice clear and cold, a perfect imitation of the man sitting beside her. "I'm not a victim here, agent, and I'm not a witness. I'm the house manager. I have everything I need right here." Johnson's face hardened. He turned to Dante. "Your pet is loyal. Cute. But this isn't over. We'll be back for you, Morello." Dante finally smiled, a slow, cold, triumphant expression. "No, you won't." He reached across his desk with his good hand and slid a thick, bound folder toward the agent. "That," he said, "is what you want. My gift to you." Johnson opened it. His eyes widened. "This is your father's files," Dante said to Grace, without looking at her. "The real ones, the ones he kept as his insurance. Not just Pharaoh's street-level operation, his international partners, the shell corporations, the politicians on his payroll, The ones you feds are too scared or too invested to touch. He leaned forward, his voice dropping. It's all yours. The price. Valement, you leave this city alone. You forget my name. You forget her name. And you grant us full immunity. You get the world. I keep my city. Or, he added, gesturing to a small, hidden microphone on his desk, this entire conversation and your very generous offer of witness protection goes to the press. Your choice. Agent Johnson, pale and shaking with a fury he couldn't show, snapped the folder shut. He didn't speak. He just picked up his recorder and walked out, his partner trailing behind him. The office was silent for a long, heavy minute. The war was finally over. You used my father's sins, Grace whispered, to buy our freedom. I used a tool, Dante replied, finally looking at her. His eyes were not cold. They were burning with a pride, a possession, that made her shiver. You chose, Grace. You chose this. You chose me. Yes, she said. He nodded, a sharp, definitive motion. Good, because the work is just beginning. The legitimate fronts, the hospital, the shipping, the real estate, they've been neglected. They're my armor. And they've been left to rust. They need a new liaison. He used the old word, but it was weighted with a new meaning. They need someone who isn't afraid to tell me I'm wrong, someone who sees the patterns in the numbers, someone to keep the wolves in check from the inside. A house manager, she said, a small smile playing on her lips. My right hand, he corrected her, his voice rough. My partner. That night, she found him on the terrace, the one where they had first almost kissed. The air was cool, the city lights below them a carpet of glittering diamonds. He was standing at the stone railing, his sling a dark shadow in the moonlight. He had a bottle of the good wine, the one from that first night, and 2 glasses. He turned as she approached, his expression serious. A toast, he said, handing her a glass, to new beginnings. They drank in silence, the only sound the distant hum of the city. He put his glass down and turned to her. He looked uncharacteristically nervous. Grace. He started, his voice rough. He took a step toward her, and then, in a move that shocked her, he bent his good knee, his body awkward, his pride warring with his intention. He sank, not to a full kneel, but into a low, respectful bow. Dante, what are you doing? She gasped, her hand going to her throat. He took her free hand, not with his injured arm, but with his good one. He held it tightly. He wasn't holding a velvet box. I don't do traditions, he said, his voice a low, pained growl. I don't have rings. Those are for other men. Those are for promises that can be broken. I'm offering you something harder. He looked up, his dark eyes vulnerable in the moonlight. I am offering you my trust, my protection, my entire world. Everything I have, everything I am. It's yours, all of it. Her eyes filled with tears. She didn't say yes. She did something else. She pulled her hand from his, and when he looked up, startled and lost, she took his good hand and pressed it flat against her chest, right over her heart. It was beating, hard and fast, a trapped bird. Only you, she whispered, her voice thick. Only you ever made it beat like this. It was always yours. He surged to his feet, a guttural sound in his chest. He pulled her against him, his good arm a steel band around her waist, his injured one held carefully between them. He buried his face in her hair, his body trembling. They stood like that for a long time, watching the first, faint, gray light of dawn begin to break over Valemont. The night was over. Grace leaned her head against his chest, feeling the steady, strong beat of his heart. I was never afraid, she whispered, a confession to the rising sun. Not of them, not even of you. I just didn't know you'd catch me. He pulled back, his hand cupping her jaw, and kissed her temple. His lips were warm. Next time, he rumbled, his voice a dark promise. They throw you to the wolves. They'll find out the Alpha has a queen. Thank you so much for listening to this story. We hope you enjoyed the journey of Grace and Dante. Please let us know where you're listening from. We love to see how far our stories travel. And if you loved this, Don't forget to subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories for more. Share your thoughts in the comments below.